We are going to begin today on our 10-minute painting on a black canvas with predominantly black paint. And we're going to do this because we want to create a very subtle and somber background. And now that we have black, wet black on the canvas, all the colors that we apply on top of it are going to be a little bit desaturated and they're going to be darker, such as this pink pigment, created out of primary red, primary blue, and a little bit of titanium white. As you can see, when we move it around and kind of apply it, it really loses all of its vibrancy, it gets a lot darker, and it creates a very subtle, somber aesthetic. Something that's really fantastic for a background such as this. As you've noticed, I've been applying all of these pigments in a tapping motion with a medium-sized old square-headed brush, one where the bristles leaf off in varying directions. So when I make a tapping motion, we render a plethora of little marks on the canvas, and these are going to imply clusters of galaxies or stars or all of that in the far, far distance. We're doing this with the very subtle color initially so that we can build on top of it, so that we can add light, so that we can test areas and see maybe I want more pink there, maybe I want more blue there, maybe I want more red there. And then we go back and we add more as I am right here. Here, as you can see, we are adding more of that same pink. I'm trying to apply it predominantly in the center of where I want my light and large clusters to be coming from, and then I expand it to the left and the right with a dabbing motion. I'm not using a brush stroke, I'm lifting my brush off the canvas, reapplying it, and continuously doing this over and over again. As we move towards the edges, the paint should dissipate on your brush, and you'll be left with a much more subtle imprint on the canvas, meaning that the center of your cluster, as you can see here, it's much more dense, it has a lot more color, and then it really dissipates and becomes much more transparent as we move towards the edge. And that's just because we are moving outwards to the left and right side of the canvas as the paint innately dissipates. I'm then taking colors such as primary blue and primary red and working them very subtly into the black background. I'm not using a lot of these pigments, but I'm trying to create a little bit of an added interest to it. I don't want it all to be purple, and a very dark blue, a very dark red will complement the purple very well because they are the two colors that work together to create it. It's also worth noting that in this rendering, I have that diagonal line that is going to be the main light source, the main cluster of light and stars. However, I do want other areas to be fairly bright as well. Not as bright, not as dominant, but enough to balance it in the painting so it doesn't look too stark, which is why we're also implementing it around the left and the right side of the canvas. I'm then going to take a primary blue and titanium white and begin to work that in the middle of our light cluster and move it again to the left and the right. I'm being very soft with my initial application, and I'm trying to ensure that that pure blue only remains in the center of our cluster there. I tried to break it up a little bit. It's not a straight line. It has zigzags and areas that are more dominant than others, and just having it constantly progress, have more transparent areas, have more opaque areas, this is going to ensure that it's very interesting. You want it to work on top and around the pink areas, and if you apply something off to the side and it's a little too dominant, you can use your finger and just wipe the paint off fairly easily. Adding additional water can also help with that as well. When you're doing this, it's also worth noting that you should have a fairly dry brush, because if you wet the brush, the bristles will all condense together and you'll lose this very random, interesting aesthetic that it's creating now. So use a fairly dry old brush. If you don't have an old brush, you can peel back the bristles on one of your brushes and render something like this very simply. Now I'm taking some pure titanium white and I'm applying it to the center very sparingly, and I'm also going to blend it too. White is something in a painting where you generally want to save it for your main subject, the portion of the painting that you really want the viewer's eye to go to. So you want to use it very sparingly. If you incorporate it in too many areas, then I'd implore you to blend on top of it, to add colors to it, to blend it out. And that's really what I'm doing here. I'm ensuring that it isn't too dominant. And we're slowly building up layers. We're slowly making it brighter and brighter and brighter. Here I'm adding a little bit of purple and just re-injecting those colors that we had initially. Because while white is bright, it desaturates the color a little bit. And if you find that your painting is getting too desaturated, go in with a pure primary red, a pure primary blue, a mixture of the two. Just avoid black and avoid white. So with that being said, through the process of that, again, you can dilute how bright it is. So I'm going back in yet again, adding more additional white, this time only to that center area. Then I'm creating brighter areas amongst it, but none with that pure white pigment. It's also important to note that while we have our main cluster of stars, we're going to begin incorporating others. And they aren't going to be as dominant. Again, they aren't going to challenge the attention of the main subject, but they're going to balance out the painting. They're going to make it look much more real in that idea, right? So here I'm just doing more of that same tapping motion, and then on the edges I'm going to incorporate a little bit of black. This is going to create a slight vignette and yet again bring the eye in towards the center for the viewer. You can draw the eye of the viewer in a number of ways, through leading lines, through composition, through value, through saturation, and using a silhouette is a very easy way to do it on a painting that doesn't have a lot of very specific mathematical line work, such as this one. I'm then going to take a small round-headed brush from Artist Loft, add a lot of water to it, a little bit of titanium white paint, and you can mix in a little bit of blue too. I'm peeling back the bristles and I'm launching the paint at the canvas. This is going to render a litany of stars. If your brush is very close to the canvas, you can render lines with it. If your brush is very far away from the canvas, you can render larger stars. So really play with it, try to get a diverse set of them and ensure you're getting something well balanced. I'm then taking a medium-sized square-headed brush and applying a black planet. No other colors, this is simply a silhouette. I'm then going to add a second planet and I'm going to make it significantly smaller. I'm going to add a third, and this is going to act as a leading line. We're then going to let it dry and then come back and work on the outer side of it, the area that's going to be adopting light from all of these stars, and we're going to do that with the same color that we used for said stars. I'm using a lot of water in the mix so that it's fairly sharp. The sharper, or rather, the more sharp you want your application to be, the more water you should add. It will thin your layer, however, it'll ensure that you don't end up with a toothy or a gritty aesthetic. And then we can be very soft and very careful and begin to work in circular motions and feather out the edges. This is going to create a look of clouds or a fog or a mist or a light that's just bouncing off slightly. And it's going to be this really beautiful glow. It's achieved again through a lot of water and blending it out from the middle. You want the middle of this area to be the most dense, and you want it to become transparent on all sides. I'm then going to go back in and add another light application in the center of that blended out foggy like aesthetic, and I'm going to blend that inwards into the planet yet again. I'm doing this with a lot of water, and I'm just ensuring that the side of the planet that is facing the light is receiving light. It looks like it exists within this three-dimensional world, or galaxy rather, and it's adopting all of this light. I'm using a lot of water. I'm slowly letting it fade back into the black as my brush runs out of paint. And then I'm simply going to add a couple of stars with my brush that are going to be larger, and it's just going to add some additional interest into the painting itself and diversify the size of stars. So really, there we have it. That is our 10-minute painting. I love these space paintings. I really hope you do too. If you're new to acrylics and you'd like to learn more, there is a link in the description to my ebook. And of course, I post every Saturday. I hope to see you next Saturday. Thank you so much for watching, and above all, stay creative.